Kia ora koutou, my name is Glenys Talivai, I'm the CEO at Public Trust, and we're here today to talk about governance in a Crown entity.
Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. My name is Banicevich, and as you just heard, today I get to spend time with Glenys Talivai of Public Trust. Glenys, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We are talking about the topic of governance in a Crown entity, which is not a private entity and not a for-purpose, not-for-profit incorporated society. It's a very different beast. So an interesting topic. What is an autonomous Crown entity and how does it differ from, in particular, a government department? Because a lot of people don't see the difference.
Sure. So an autonomous Crown entity is kind of a type of state sector organisation that operates at arm's length from the government and is governed by an independent board. So I report to a board of directors and it differs from a government department mainly because it has some autonomy in its decision making.
Right, and a government department tends to report to a minister, right? Whereas when I worked at the Financial Markets Authority, it too is an autonomous Crown entity, and my boss would say that your boss's boss is the Governor General, rather than a minister, which is a nice way to look at it.
That would be true. That would be true.
So yes, I guess it's that your boss's boss would be the Governor General. That's it. Yeah. Have you thought of it that way before?
Look, I mean, we do think about it. It has multiple layers. I mean, ultimately, day in, day out, I report to a board.
Yes.
At the moment, we've got 8 members of our board, but we do have oversight and monitoring with Treasury.
Yes.
And we report to a responsible minister.
Minister as well.
In Public Trust's case, that can be a dual reporting between finance and justice. So that makes things interesting again.
Yes.
It is an interesting, I suppose, I don't know what the right word is, but it's kind of an interesting layering of governance for the organisation. Yeah,
that actually brings me on to my next question, and you've touched on it there. You've had experience in executive roles at different organisations. You started out with 10 years at ANZ, you've been in the insurance business as well, and now as CEO of Public Trust. How does governance differ from the private sector businesses you've worked in, from the autonomous Crown entity?
Yeah, look, I mean, governance in an autonomous Crown entity, in all honesty, it doesn't actually feel that much different to a private sector company that I've worked in before. In fact, it's, a lot of it's very much the same. I report to a board day in, day out, decisions and the like are being made with the board. I think the overlay is that there is this monitoring component with Treasury, so there's also an element of reporting in there, as well as reporting and engaging with our responsible minister. And I think one of the key mechanisms that happens is every year our responsible minister will send us a letter of expectations.
That's right.
That guides the board and the organisation in terms of key things that we'll be thinking about and focused on for the year.
Right, so it's almost like the board is being given some direction rather than setting the direction themselves, and then the impact on you is you're communicating with the board.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there are still a lot of things that the board will set direction on within that. I think, though, the letter of expectations makes it really clear about the different types of outcomes that the organisation, in the context of, the government priorities, is expected to deliver or think about.
Right. How are board members appointed to Crown entities? What criteria are used to ensure that there's diversity of skills, diversity of experience, and different perspectives?
Yeah, so board members are essentially appointed by our responsible minister following a process that's coordinated through the Treasury. There'll be multiple, I suppose, series of engagements around what skills and experiences are needed on the board. And the board chair might feed into that process with the Treasury, but it's the Treasury that coordinates, actually going out to market to look for people interested in joining the board and going through that recruitment process, but it's the responsible minister who appoints them.
And the board are each individually on rolling terms, aren't they? So they don't all expire at the same time. So if there's a change in government, it's not like the new minister comes in and gets rid of the whole board and replaces the whole board. They just roll off as their terms potentially expire and get renewed.
Yes, that's right. So we do have a rolling cycle of board members in terms of their terms and or their initial terms, which I understand is 3 years usually. So, and they're rolling at different times.
Yeah, so you don't have this. You're not particularly led and controlled by the minister. The board is quite independent, and really the influence that the minister has is, as you say, with the annual letter of expectations, and then as board members roll off, they may have an influence in helping to select, or selecting, of course, because they finally approve the new board members going onto the board.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Apart from that, what mechanisms are in place to ensure independence and autonomy in decision making while you're fulfilling both the statutory obligations, because you've got those, as well as the government's priorities and the letter of expectation?
Well, I think like any entity, Public Trust has got a really strong governance framework and risk framework, and I think transparent reporting in terms of decision making is quite key elements just of any board and governance regime. I think equally too, what's quite unique about Public Trust is we are governed by our own legislation, and that in some ways guarantees independence from the Crown. We are dealing with day in, day out client and customer monies and funds, and so it's really important that we're acting in the best interests of our customers in our fiduciary capacity.
Yes.
And it is quite clear in our Act that the Crown isn't able to interfere and overlap into that, which I think is also a key in terms of what we do about guaranteeing independence. But outside of that, I think that there are really strong governance frameworks and the like that that also bolsters that further.
Well, you've had over 100 years to get that right, haven't you?
Yeah, 150.
150
yeah,
years. Well, it's going to be one of the
years.
oldest organisations in the country, isn't it?
I'd say so.
Yeah. What role does the board play in setting the strategic direction and objectives of the Crown entity, as well as what role does it play in monitoring the performance against the goals once they're established?
Yeah. So our board, I think like any board of an organisation, particularly like I said, it feels very similar to private sector boards that I've worked on, is critical in setting the strategic direction of Public Trust and regularly monitors performance. I talked a bit earlier, of course, there's that additional overlay of monitoring that goes beyond in terms of our ownership and the ecosystem that Public Trust works within, but that's certainly a key role that the board plays. So setting the direction, of course, they take into consideration the expectations that we get from our responsible minister, but equally to look at our organisation, the trends, the opportunities for our business as you would everywhere else in terms of setting the strategic direction.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of governance, every entity has its own swimming lanes in terms of the legal parameters by which it operates. Public Trust just has slightly narrower swimming lanes because you've got objectives that are set in the legislation and then the minister setting some direction as well.
That's correct, that's correct. And the objectives of the company to be efficient, effective, to prudently manage assets and liabilities, to be a good employer and the like, is set out in our legislation. So there is a pretty rigid guidance for the board to follow in that regard.
Yeah, excellent. What initiatives are undertaken to support board development, their training, their succession planning, to ensure you've got a capable and diverse governance team?
Yeah, so I think we have a range of things that I've seen in place at Public Trust. That includes board induction, both in the organisation. I think Treasury also run a broader induction for Crown entities at least once a year, which I think is also helpful for members. Board members attend conferences. I think any training in and out of the organisation that they need. They do a lot of in my experience here, they do a lot of attendance together in terms of seminars or the like that might be relevant in terms of our particular industry. And of course they do regular board evaluations, which I think is a continuous development. You get quite specific individual and team feedback in terms of how well the board is operating.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I've got one final question for you, which is a little bit off topic. It's a general question I ask most interviewees. What's the best governance advice you've received?
Look, I think the best governance advice that I've received is that, particularly as a chief executive, is that, when you're engaging with a board, I think, when you've got critical things that you want to move forward on or big issues in the organisation, I think making sure that you're really clear around, so what is it that you're asking from the board? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to discuss? And actually, what do you want them to make decisions about? Because I suppose where I sit, you get very familiar with how the business is operating, exactly what's going on. For a board at a governance level, it really needs to be actually, so how do you get to the heart of the matter really quickly and help the board to really understand what is the issue or what is the decision or what is the direction that's needed, why is it important, and what are we asking for them to do so that they can do their governance job really well. I think that was a really good piece of advice. It's really thinking about so what do you want the board to be thinking about or to do in this particular context?
Excellent, that's great. Thank you, Glenys. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time.
That's okay.
I'll look forward to catching up again.
Thank you.
And see you next episode.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.